They sold my silence to the mad Siren King, the blessed silent. The silence was my world. It was not an empty silence. It was a heavy one. It was the silence of people watching me, waiting for a miracle that would never come from my lips. My name is Isabel. I have never spoken a word. In our small, poor pack, my silence was not a problem. It was my purpose. They called me the Blessed Silent. They believed the moon goddess had touched me and taken my voice to make me holy. My mother would brush my hair every night with tears in her eyes. "You are so special, my darling," she would whisper, "our greatest gift." But I did not feel like a gift. I felt like a prisoner. My family loved me, but they loved the idea of me more. They loved the respect our pack got for having me. I was not a daughter. I was a treasure kept in a glass box. Every morning, pack members would come to our small home. They brought gifts, flowers, bread, small coins. They would kneel in front of me and whisper their prayers. They asked the moon goddess to bless their hunts, their crops, their children. I sat still and let them worship me. My mother had taught me that moving too much would break the spell, that showing too much emotion would make me seem ordinary. So I became a living statue, beautiful and silent and empty. The loneliness ate at me like a disease. I watched other girls my age laugh with their friends, argue with their mothers, flirt with boys. They lived. I existed. I learned to speak with my hands, creating a language of gestures that only my family understood. But even then, my mother would often stop me. "Not in front of others, dear," she would say. "They need to see you as the goddess made you, perfect and still. Perfect and still, like a corpse." The day the strangers came, I knew my life would change. 3 men stood in our meeting hall. They wore fine clothes made of materials I had never seen, silk that shimmered like water, leather soft as butter. Their faces were tired and sad. They smelled of salt and deep, still water. Our alpha, Marcus, a man I had always trusted, smiled a wide, false smile. "Welcome, honored guests from the Siren King's court," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "We have what you need. We offer you our blessed silent. Her peace will calm your king's sickness." My heart stopped. Offer? I looked at my parents, sitting in the front row. My father, Thomas, stared at the floor, his weathered hands clenched in his lap. My mother, Sarah, cried, but she nodded. She was nodding. They were not asking me. They were selling me. The leader of the strangers, a tall man with silver hair and kind but weary eyes, spoke carefully. "We have heard tales of your silent one. Our king, he suffers greatly. His power, his song, it destroys everything he tries to protect." He gestured to his companions, and one of them opened a heavy chest. It was full of gold coins, more money than our pack had ever seen. Enough to buy food for the winter, new tools, medicine for the sick. My father's eyes locked on that gold. I saw his face change. The shame was there, but so was hope. Hope for a better life for everyone else. Marcus continued his sales pitch like I was livestock. "She has never spoken, never made a sound of any kind. The moon goddess herself blessed our pack when she was born silent. She communicates only through sacred gestures. Her very presence brings peace." The silver-haired man looked at me. His gaze was not unkind, but it was careful. He was checking the quality of what he was buying. "Does she understand?" he asked. Marcus nodded eagerly. "She understands her duty. Her silence is a gift she gives freely to those who need it." It was a lie. No one had ever asked me what I wanted to give. The stranger walked closer to me. Up close, I could see the deep sadness in his pale blue eyes. "Child," he said softly, "do you know why we have come?" I nodded. I understood that they needed something from me, something to help their king. "Are you willing?" he asked. The question shocked me. No one had ever asked me if I was willing before. I looked around the room, at my parents, who couldn't meet my eyes, at Marcus, whose face was bright with greed, at the pack members who had spent years treating me like a holy relic instead of a person. What choice did I have? If I said no, if I could say no, would they let me stay? Would they still treat me the same way, or would I become worthless to them, just another burden to feed? At least with these strangers, I might find a different kind of prison. I nodded again. The silver-haired man's face softened with what looked like pity. "My name is Captain Aldrich," he said. "I serve King Theron. I promise you will be treated with respect and kindness." The transaction was completed quickly after that. Gold changed hands, ownership of me changed hands. My mother packed my few belongings, simple dresses, my hairbrushes, the paper and pencils I used to write when no one was watching. She folded each item with shaking hands. "You will save them all," she whispered to me as she worked. "Their king, his people. What an honor this is, my darling. What a blessed honor." She hugged me tightly, her tears soaking into my hair. But even in that moment, I felt the distance between us. She was hugging the blessed silent, the holy symbol. She wasn't hugging Isabel. My father finally looked at me as I was led to the waiting carriage. His eyes were red with unshed tears and shame. "Forgive me," he mouthed silently. I wanted to tell him there was nothing to forgive. I wanted to tell him I understood. They had given me the only life they knew how to give. But I also wanted to scream at him, to ask why my happiness had never mattered as much as everyone else's. Instead, I just nodded and got into the carriage. The door closed with a soft click. As we rolled away from the only home I had ever known, I did not look back. Tears fell down my cheeks, but they were silent. Even my crying had been trained to make no sound. I was not blessed. I was alone, and I was sold. The journey lasted 3 days. We traveled through landscapes I had only heard about in stories. Rolling hills covered in wildflowers, dense forests where the trees grew so tall they seemed to touch the sky, rivers that sparkled like jewels in the sunlight. Captain Aldrich and his men were kind to me. They made sure I had enough food and water. They set up a private tent for me each night. They never made me feel like cargo, even though that's what I was. On the second night, Captain Aldrich sat by the campfire and told me about their king. "Theron is a good man," he said, his voice heavy with worry, "but he carries a terrible burden. His family line is cursed. The power that was meant to protect his people instead destroys them. His song, it's beautiful and terrible. It turns living things to stone." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. "He isolates himself to protect everyone else. He hasn't touched another person in years. The loneliness is killing him as surely as any blade." I wrote on my paper, "Why do you think I can help?" Captain Aldrich read the note and sighed. "Honestly, we don't know if you can. We've tried everything else. Healers, mages, priests. Nothing works. But there are old stories, legends about silence being able to calm the song. You're our last hope." "What if I can't help him?" "Then we'll find you a safe place to live," he said gently. "You won't be a prisoner. That's not who Theron is." On the third day, we entered Theron's territory. The change was immediate and unsettling. The trees were tall and dark. their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. The air grew cold and wet, clinging to my skin like damp fabric. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed afraid to make noise here. Finally, our carriage topped a hill, and I saw the castle. It was enormous, made of smooth, black stone that reflected the gray sky like dark water. It looked like a beautiful tomb, all soaring towers and graceful arches, but it was the quietest place I had ever seen or felt. The silence here was different from mine. My silence was imposed, artificial. This was the silence of death. As we approached the main gates, I saw them. Statues lined the entrance road, dozens of them. They were incredibly detailed, so lifelike I could see individual eyelashes, the texture of fabric, the expression of fear or surprise on their faces. But they were not statues of heroes or ancient kings. They were statues of ordinary people. A woman reaching for her child, a guard made laugh with his friends, an old man feeding birds. My blood ran cold as understanding hit me. These were not statues. These were people. People who had been turned to stone by the king's curse. The carriage stopped in the main courtyard. A servant, a thin woman with nervous eyes, helped me down. She would not meet my gaze directly.
"The king is preparing to meet you," she said softly. "Please, come with me." I was led through halls that should have been magnificent. The architecture was beautiful, with high ceilings painted with scenes of ocean storms and soaring birds. Tapestries showed the history of the Siren people, their ships, their battles, their songs. But everything felt hollow, empty, like a beautiful shell with nothing alive inside it. More stone people lined the halls. Some were only partially transformed, a hand turned to marble, a foot frozen in granite. They were caught between life and death, and it was the most horrible thing I had ever seen. The servant led me to a large room with tall windows that looked out over a garden. It was furnished with soft chairs and a warm fire. Books lined the walls. It was a nice prison. "The king will be with you shortly," the servant said, and hurried away. I waited. I explored the room, running my fingers over the spines of books written in languages I didn't recognize. I looked out at the garden, where stone flowers bloomed among real ones. Then the door opened. The Siren King stood there. He was the largest man I had ever seen. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. He was handsome, with sharp features and thick, dark hair that fell to his shoulders. His skin was pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. But it was his eyes that captured me. They were dark blue, like the ocean during a storm, and they held so much pain it took my breath away. A faint, angry light seemed to flicker in their depths. He looked me up and down, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like distant thunder. "So," he said, and immediately I felt a headache start behind my eyes. There was something wrong with his voice, something that made my skin crawl. "You're the silence they promised? The living cure?" He stepped into the room and I felt the air change. It hummed with a painful energy that seemed to come from him. The sound of his footsteps echoed strangely, as if the stone itself was afraid. "My men paid a fortune in gold for you," he continued, his voice getting louder. It was like listening to a song with all the wrong notes, beautiful and terrible at the same time. "I hope they're worth it. What can you do? Just sit there and look peaceful?" The pain in my head grew worse. His voice was the source of the curse. I could feel it in my bones, in my blood. It was a song that wanted to turn everything to stone.
But underneath the curse, I could hear something else. Loneliness, desperation, self-hatred so deep it was like a wound that would never heal. He was not a monster. He was a man in agony. When I didn't respond, couldn't respond, his frustration boiled over. He slammed his fist on a wooden table, and the impact sent cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. The sound that came from his throat was raw and primal, like a wounded animal. "Damn it!" he roared, and a crystal vase on the mantelpiece shattered. Another false hope, another lie. He clutched his head with both hands, his eyes squeezed shut in pain. His whole body shook with the effort of containing the song that was trying to escape. I forgot my fear. I forgot that I was supposed to be a holy symbol, untouchable and pure. I saw only his suffering. Without thinking, I stepped forward. I reached out my hand, and I placed my palm flat against his. The moment my skin touched his, everything changed. I felt it immediately, a terrible, violent vibration under his skin, like 1,000 discordant notes trapped inside him, fighting to get out. It was agony given form, chaos trying to find release. But the instant I touched him, the vibration softened. The chaotic notes found harmony. The storm in his chest calmed to a gentle rhythm. Theron's eyes snapped open, wide with shock. The angry light faded from them, replaced with wonder. The pain lines around his eyes smoothed away. He took a deep, clean breath, perhaps the first he had taken in years. "How?" he whispered, his voice now soft and uncertain. "How did you do that?" For the first time in my life, someone was looking at me, not at the blessed silent, not at a thing they had bought or a symbol they needed. They were looking at me, Isabel, as if I was the most important thing in the world. And in that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. I felt seen.
Chapter 2. The Monster in the Castle. Theron, King Theron, stared at me like I had just performed a miracle. His hand came up slowly, almost afraid, and covered mine where it still rested on his chest. His skin was warm and slightly rough from old scars. Under my palm, I could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart instead of that terrible, chaotic vibration. "Your touch," he breathed. "The noise in my head, it's just gone." I had never seen wonder before, not real wonder, but it was there in his eyes, transforming his harsh features into something beautiful and vulnerable. I started to pull my hand back, suddenly aware of how forward I was being, but his hand tightened over mine, holding me in place. "Please," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Just a moment longer." So I stayed. I let him have that moment of peace, even though my heart was beating so hard I was sure he could feel it through my palm. He closed his eyes and just breathed. Deep, even breaths like a man who had been drowning and finally found air. I watched the tension drain from his shoulders, saw the pain lines around his mouth smooth away. When he opened his eyes again, they were different. The storm was still there, but it was calm now, watchful instead of violent. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was careful now, controlled, as if he was afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter whatever magic had just happened. I pointed to the small travel bag that the servant had brought in. My mother had packed my few things with such care, folding each item like it was precious. On top was the small wooden name tag she had carved for me when I was a child. It was one of the few things that belonged to me, not to the blessed silent. Theron picked it up with gentle fingers. "Isabel," he read aloud. He said my name like he was tasting it, testing how it felt on his tongue. I am Theron. He looked from the name tag back to my face, studying me with new eyes. The anger was gone completely now. In its place was confusion and something that looked dangerously like hope. I have not known quiet since I was 12 years old, he said, and I realized he wasn't really talking to me. He was talking to himself, trying to understand what had just happened. The song has been with me every moment. A terrible, screaming music in my blood. It leaks out. It hurts everyone I care about. He looked around the room at the stone walls that had been built to contain his curse. It hurts everything.
I understood then why the castle felt so empty, so dead. He had isolated himself completely to protect others from what he was. He wasn't a monster. He was a man in a cage, and his own power was the lock. Can you... He hesitated, as if afraid to ask. Would you do that again? I nodded and stepped closer. This time I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the corded muscle beneath his shirt sleeve. The effect was immediate and even stronger. The last traces of tension melted away from his body. He swayed slightly, and I realized that the absence of pain was almost overwhelming for him. A single tear escaped, cutting a clean path down his cheek. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I had ever seen. I'm sorry, he said, wiping the tear away with his free hand. It's been so long since I've felt anything but pain. He looked at me with something that might have been shame. I am sorry for how I spoke to you before. The constant agony, it makes me cruel sometimes. I wished I could tell him that I understood, that pain had a way of building walls around people's hearts. But I had no voice to offer comfort, only my presence and my touch. He seemed to understand anyway. You must be tired from your journey, he said. Let me show you to your room. My room. Not a cell, not a shrine. A room. He led me through corridors that felt less oppressive now that I was walking beside him. The stone people lining the halls were no less tragic, but somehow Theron's presence made them seem less like warnings and more like reminders of what he was fighting to protect. The room he showed me was beautiful. It had a large, comfortable bed with soft blue blankets, a window that looked out over dark forests, and, my heart leaped with joy, a small wooden desk with paper and pencils arranged neatly on top. For you, he said, pointing to the writing materials. So you can speak, if you wish to. My chest felt too tight to breathe properly. No one had ever given me a way to truly communicate before. In my old life, my thoughts and feelings had been considered irrelevant. I was meant to be a silent vessel for others' hopes and prayers. I picked up one of the pencils and wrote quickly, "Thank you." He read the words and smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. You are most welcome, Isabel. The way he said my name, like it mattered, like I mattered, made something warm unfurl in my chest.
You are not a prisoner here, he continued. You are a guest, my most honored guest. You may go anywhere in the castle you wish. The servants have been instructed to provide you with anything you need. I wrote, What do you need from me? His expression grew complicated. I was told your silence could bring me peace, and it does. Your presence, your touch. But I don't want to trap you the way your old life did. I can see that you were caged there, even if that cage was made of reverence instead of bars. How did he see that? How did he understand what no one in my pack had ever realized? You were caged too, I wrote. He read the words, and his smile turned sad. Yes, I suppose we both know what it's like to be prisoners of other people's needs.
Over the next few days, I began to explore my new life. It was strange to wake up each morning and not have people lined up outside my door, waiting to worship me. Strange to eat meals without having to sit perfectly still while others watched my every movement for signs of divine favor. The servants were kind, but nervous around me. They had been told I was there to help their king, and they looked at me with desperate hope that was uncomfortably familiar. But Theron was different. He didn't demand my presence or my touch. Instead, he simply found ways to be near me. He would sit in the library while I read, working on his own papers in comfortable silence. He would walk with me in the gardens, pointing out plants and flowers and telling me their stories. He never asked me to touch him, though I could see the pain return to his eyes when we were apart for too long. The song was always there, always threatening to break free, but he bore it rather than make demands on me. I began touching him of my own accord. A hand on his arm when the pain grew too visible, my palm against his back when he sat hunched over his desk fighting the curse. Small contacts that brought him relief and brought me something I had no name for yet. The castle began to feel less like a tomb. Servants smiled more when their king appeared without pain carved into his features. They sang softly as they worked when they thought he couldn't hear. But the stone people remained. They were everywhere, frozen reminders of what the song could do. Some were only partially transformed, caught between flesh and marble in a way that made my heart ache.
One afternoon, I found myself in a small courtyard garden tucked behind the kitchen. It was clearly someone's private space, filled with herbs and vegetables instead of the formal flower beds I'd seen elsewhere. In the center of the garden was a fountain that no longer worked, and beside it, a small stone figure that made me stop breathing. It was a wolf pup, no bigger than a house cat. It had been caught mid-step, one paw raised as if it had been running towards something or someone. Its ears were pricked forward, its tail partially wagged. But what broke my heart was its eyes. Even in stone, I could see the fear there, the confusion. This little creature had been running to someone it trusted, and in that moment of joy and love, it had been turned to marble. I knelt beside the statue and reached out with trembling fingers to touch its cold stone head. The poor little thing. It must have been someone's pet, someone's beloved companion. Without thinking, I began to hum. It was just a soft, wordless melody, a lullaby my grandmother had sung to me when I was very small, before the pack had decided I was blessed, before I had learned that making sound was forbidden. The vibrations started low in my chest and traveled down my arm into my hand where it touched the stone pup. I felt something shift. The stone under my palm grew warm. The vibration in my chest grew stronger, more focused, as if it had found a purpose. A small crack appeared on the pup's head. I gasped and almost stopped humming, but something, instinct maybe, or desperate hope, made me continue. I poured everything into that quiet song, all my sadness for this little creature, all my longing to see it run and play again, all my newfound understanding of what it meant to be trapped in stone. The crack spread. Then another appeared. The gray stone began to flake away like old paint, revealing something underneath. Soft, gray fur. The transformation spread slowly from my hand outward. Stone became flesh. Marble became warm, living tissue. I watched in wonder as the pup's chest began to rise and fall with breath. Its eyes, real eyes now, bright and alive, blinked in confusion. It shook its small head, looked around the garden with bewilderment, then focused on me. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then the pup wagged its tail, its real flesh and blood tail, and darted away into the bushes. I sat back on my heels, staring at my hands in shock. I had done that. My voice, my touch,
My song, it had brought life back from stone. By all the gods! I spun around. Theron stood at the entrance to the courtyard, his face white with shock. He had seen everything. He walked toward me with slow, careful steps, as if I were some wild creature that might bolt if he moved too quickly. "Isabel," he said, his voice full of awe and something that might have been fear. "You didn't just quiet the song, you reversed it." He fell to his knees in front of me, his hands shaking as he reached out to frame my face. "You brought life back from death," he whispered. "You undid what my curse destroyed." Tears were streaming down his cheeks now, and I realized they were tears of hope. For the first time since his curse had manifested, he was seeing proof that it could be undone. I picked up a stick and scratched words in the dirt between us. "I can help them. I can help all of them." He read the words and looked from them to my face, his expression cycling through wonder, hope, and terror. "The cost," he said suddenly, grabbing my hands. "Magic like this, there's always a cost. What is it taking from you?" I didn't know. I felt tired, more drained than I should after such a small song. But compared to seeing that little pup run free, it seemed like nothing. "I don't know," I scratched in the dirt, "but they need help." "They're already dead, Isabel," he said, his voice desperate. "But you're alive. You're here and you're alive, and I will not let you sacrifice yourself for them." It was the first time anyone had ever said my life was more important than my ability to help others. The first time anyone had cared more about me than what I could give them. But as I looked at his face, at the hope and terror warring in his expression, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't just the blessed silent anymore. I wasn't just a tool for healing or a symbol of divine favor. I was a woman, and this man, this beautiful, broken, powerful man, was looking at me like I was the most precious thing in his world. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming alive.
Chapter 3. The First Song. The morning after I healed the stone pup, I woke to find a small bundle of gray fur curled up on my windowsill. The little wolf had found its way to my room somehow and seemed to have decided I belonged to it. When I sat up in bed, it opened bright amber eyes and wagged its tail, as if to say, "Good morning. Thank you for giving me back my life." I had never had a pet before. In my old life, animals had been kept away from me in case they disturbed my holy silence. But this little creature, I decided to call it Hope, seemed to understand that I was different now. Hope followed me to breakfast, trotting at my heels like a tiny shadow. The servants' eyes went wide when they saw it. They all knew the stone pup that had sat in the garden for 2 years. Seeing it alive and breathing was like witnessing resurrection. Theron was already in the dining room when I arrived. He took one look at Hope and smiled. The first truly joyful smile I had seen from him. "I see you've made a friend," he said, watching as Hope jumped onto a chair and then onto the table, clearly expecting to share breakfast. I wrote on the paper I now carried everywhere, "Is this allowed?" "For the woman who gave life back to the dead," Theron said. "I think we can bend the rules about pets on furniture." As we ate, I watched him carefully. The pain was back in his eyes, not as sharp as before, but present. The song was building pressure again, like water behind a dam. Without really thinking about it, I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. The relief was immediate. His shoulders relaxed, and he took a deep breath. But I also felt something else, a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with magic. His skin was warm and calloused from swordwork, strong, masculine. When had I started noticing such things? He turned his hand palm up so our fingers could intertwine. The gesture was intimate in a way that my heart raced. "Thank you," he said softly. "I slept better last night knowing you were here. Just knowing."
The pup wasn't the only one trapped in stone, I wrote with my free hand.
He read the words, and his expression grew thoughtful. No, I suppose it wasn't. He squeezed my fingers gently. But what if I told you I was afraid to hope? What if I said that watching you heal hope was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I've ever seen? Why terrifying? Because, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, because for the first time in years, I have something to lose. The meaning behind his words hit me like lightning. He wasn't just talking about hope for his people. He was talking about me, about us, about whatever this growing connection between us might become. I should have been frightened. A month ago, I had never even spoken to a man who wasn't a family member. I had certainly never felt this warm, fluttering sensation in my chest when someone looked at me. But instead of fear, I felt alive, more alive than I had ever been. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change both our lives. I was going to heal more of the stone people. Theron found me in the main hall, standing in front of a statue of a young woman. She had been caught reaching for something, maybe her child, maybe a lover. Her face was frozen in an expression of desperate longing. "Isabel," he said, and I could hear the worry in his voice. "What are you doing?" I showed him the paper where I had written my plan. Her name was Marina. She was a baker. She has a daughter who cries for her every night. "How do you know that?" he asked. I asked the servants. They remember everyone. He was quiet for a long moment, studying Marina's frozen face. "She was kind," he said, finally. "She used to bring extra bread to families who couldn't afford it. Then she deserves to come home." I knelt beside the statue and placed both hands on Marina's frozen arms. I closed my eyes and began to hum, the same lullaby I had used on Hope, but stronger now, more focused. The magic felt different this time, more demanding. It pulled at something deep inside me, something that felt essential and irreplaceable. But I pushed through the discomfort and poured all my will into the song. The stone began to crack. Gray marble flaked away to reveal warm, brown skin. Marina's chest began to rise and fall with breath. Her eyes opened, real, living eyes full of confusion and fear. "Where?" she gasped. "What happened? The last thing I remember—" "You're safe," Theron said, kneeling beside us. "You've been ill, but you're going to be fine now." Marina looked from Theron to me, her gaze settling on my face with wonder. "You," she whispered, "you brought me back." I managed a weak smile, though the healing had left me dizzy and drained. 2 servants rushed forward to help Marina to her feet and take her to the infirmary. As they led her away, I heard her crying with joy. "Mama's coming home," she kept saying. "Mama's coming home to her little girl." The sound of her happiness was worth every drop of energy the healing had cost me. But Theron was looking at me with deep concern. "You're pale," he said, helping me to my feet. "And you're shaking." I was. The healing had taken more out of me than I had expected. My legs felt weak, and there was a strange ringing in my ears. "I'm fine," I wrote, though the letters came out shaky. "You're not fine," he said firmly. "You're going to rest, now." He helped me back to my room, his arm around my waist to steady me. Hope trotted along beside us, whimpering with concern. "How many more were you planning to heal today?" he asked as he settled me on my bed. "As many as I can." "Isabel, no." His voice was sharp with worry, and something that sounded like anger. "I won't let you destroy yourself for them. They're your people. And you're—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're important to me, more important than you realize. They have families who miss them. I know that." The words came out harsher than he intended, and he immediately looked sorry.
I know that, and I've lived with that guilt for years, but I will not watch you kill yourself trying to undo what I've done.
Then help me find a better way. The simple request seemed to deflate his anger. He sat on the edge of my bed, careful not to crowd me. "What do you mean?" he asked. I thought for a moment, then wrote, "The magic is stronger when you're near, when I can feel your presence. Maybe together we can heal them faster, with less cost." He considered this, his brow furrowed in thought. "You want me to be there when you heal them, even though my song could interfere? Your song is what created this. Maybe it needs to be part of undoing it." It was just a guess, really, but something about the idea felt right. "It's dangerous," he said. "If I lose control, if the song escapes while you're using your magic, then we'll stop," I wrote. "But we have to try." He looked at me for a long time, conflict clear in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "One more today," he said. "Just one. And if it doesn't work, or if you show any signs of distress, we stop. Agreed?" Agreed. We chose a young man this time, a guard who had been turned to stone while protecting a group of children from Theron's uncontrolled song. His name was David, and he had a wife who visited his statue every day to tell him about their newborn son. David's stone form stood in the courtyard, his arms outstretched as if shielding invisible children. His face was set in determined lines, a man willing to die for innocence. I knelt beside him while Theron stood behind me. I could feel the tension radiating from his body, the careful control he maintained over his song. "Are you ready?" I asked, speaking out loud for the first time that day. My voice was still rough and unused, but it was mine. "Yes," he said softly. "But if you feel anything wrong, anything at all, I'll stop," I promised. I placed my hands on David's stone chest and began to hum. This time, instead of fighting against the magic's demands, I tried to work with Theron's presence behind me. The difference was immediate and startling. The magic flowed easier, stronger, but somehow less draining. It was as if Theron's cursed song was providing power for my healing instead of fighting against it. The stone began to crack and flake away faster than before. But I could also feel something else, a connection forming between Theron and me that went deeper than touch. Our magic was intertwining, his curse becoming fuel for my cure. David's eyes opened and he gasped, drawing his first breath in months. But instead of the confusion that Marina had shown, he looked directly at Theron. "My king," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "The children, are they safe?" "They're safe," Theron assured him, helping him to his feet. "Thanks to you." As David was led away to reunite with his family, I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me, but it was different from before, less like something essential was being torn away, and more like the pleasant tiredness after honest work. "How do you feel?" Theron asked, studying my face intently. "Better," I said, and meant it. "Stronger, actually. Your presence, it helped." Relief flooded his features. Then we continued tomorrow, but slowly, carefully. "One more," I wrote on my paper, showing it to him. "Isabel, please? Just one more. I can feel that this is working." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced him. "One more, and then you rest for the remainder of the day." We chose a little girl next, perhaps 7 years old, turned to stone while picking flowers for her mother. Her name was Lucy, and her parents visited her statue twice daily, leaving fresh flowers and small toys. This healing was even easier than David's. The magic flowed between Theron and me like water finding its natural course. The little girl awoke with a smile, asking if she could finally give her mama the flowers she'd picked. But when I stood up after the healing, something felt different. I caught my reflection in a window and stopped breathing. There,
Starting at my left temple and streaking back through my brown hair was a ribbon of pure white, the color of old age, the color of magic's price. Theron saw it at the same moment I did. His face went pale as death.
"No," he whispered, reaching out to touch the white strand with trembling fingers. "No, this cannot be the cost." But even as he spoke, we both knew it was. The magic that healed his people was aging me. Each life I brought back from stone was stealing time from my own. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt strangely calm. "How much time do you think it took?" I wrote. "I don't know," he said, his voice breaking. "Months? Years? Isabel, you cannot. I will not let you. It's my choice." "No." His hands cupped my face, his thumb brushing over the white streak. "I won't be the reason you die young. I won't be another person who uses you up and throws you away." "You're not using me. I'm choosing this." "Because you've never been allowed to choose anything else." The words exploded out of him, raw with pain and fury, not at me, but at everyone who had made me believe my worth lay only in sacrifice. "You've been taught your whole life that your value comes from what you can give others, but you're worth more than that. You're worth more than all of them combined." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. No one had ever suggested that I might be valuable just for existing, just for being Isabel. The white streak in my hair was proof of what the healing cost me. But looking into Theron's eyes, seeing the desperate love there, the fear of losing me, I realized I had gained something too. I had gained someone who saw me as more than a tool, someone who would rather live with his curse than watch me sacrifice myself to cure it. "I love you," I wrote on my paper, the words coming from the deepest part of my heart. He stared at the words for a long moment, then looked up at me with wonder and terrible sadness. "And I love you," he said, "which is why we have to find another way." Chapter 4. The Price of Peace. That night, I dreamed of singing. Not the careful, controlled humming I used for healing. Real singing, loud and wild and free. In my dream, my voice was powerful enough to shake mountains, to call down stars, to reshape the world itself. I woke to find Theron sitting in the chair beside my bed, his head in his hands. Dawn light streamed through the windows, and I realized he had been there all night. "You were singing in your sleep," he said without looking up. "The most beautiful sound I've ever heard." I sat up, suddenly alert. What did it do? He looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Wonder and terror in equal measure. The whole castle heard it, Isabel. Every single person touched by the curse, they all healed. In their sleep, the stone just fell away. My heart stopped. I had healed everyone, all of them, in one night. But if the healing had been that powerful, that complete, I rushed to my mirror with trembling hands. My reflection stared back at me, and I gasped in shock. Half of my hair was now white as fresh snow. The streaks had spread while I slept, stealing color and years from me. My face looked drawn, older. The cost had been enormous. "I'm sorry," Theron said, his voice breaking as he appeared behind me in the mirror. "I should have found another way. I should have protected you from this." I turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. For the first time in hours, I tried to speak aloud. "I chose this," I whispered, my voice rough but determined. His eyes went wide at the sound. My voice. He was hearing my real voice. "Isabel." He breathed my name like a prayer. I smiled, even though I was afraid, even though I could feel something essential draining away from me like water through my fingers. "Now they know,"
I wrote on my paper with shaking hands, that silence is not the only way to be strong. The castle erupted in celebration that morning. People I had healed came to find me. Marina with her little daughter, David with his wife and baby, Lucy with armfuls of fresh flowers. They brought gifts and tears of gratitude.
Children laughed in the halls for the first time in years. Servants sang as they worked. The very stones seemed to vibrate with joy and life. But I could barely lift my head from my pillow. The healing had taken more from me than I had imagined possible. My body felt like it was made of spun glass, fragile and ready to shatter. Every movement was an effort. Every breath was a conscious choice. Theron stayed with me, bringing me soup and holding the cup to my lips when my hands shook too badly to manage it. His touch was infinitely gentle, as if I might dissolve at any moment. "The healers don't know how to help you," he said, his voice heavy with guilt and desperation. "This kind of magic, they've never seen anything like it." I wanted to tell him it was all right, that seeing his people free and happy was worth any price, that watching the joy return to his eyes was worth years of my life. But I was too tired to write, too tired to speak. The words stayed trapped inside me, just like they had been for so many years. He seemed to understand anyway. He always understood me, even without words. "You saved them all," he said, brushing a strand of white hair away from my face with reverent fingers. "My brave, beautiful, impossible girl. You saved everyone but yourself." That evening, despite my protests, he carried me to the balcony so I could see his people celebrating in the courtyard below. They danced and sang, their voices carrying up to us like music made of pure joy. "They're singing about you," Theron said softly, his arms tightening around me, "about this silent angel who gave them back their lives." I watched them dance, these people I had saved. A little girl, Lucy, with her flowers, looked up and saw me on the balcony. She waved with both hands, her face glowing with happiness, and I managed to wave back with what little strength I had. "I have to tell you something," Theron said, his voice growing serious. "My healers think they've discovered why the curse existed in the first place." I looked at him, waiting. 300 years ago, my ancestor, King Aldrich the Bold, made a bargain with a sorceress named Morgotha. He wanted power to protect his people from invading armies. She gave him the song, a weapon that could turn enemies to stone. He paused, his jaw tightening with old anger. But Morgotha was treacherous. She twisted the magic so it would turn inward instead of outward. Instead of protecting his people, Aldrich began destroying them. The curse has passed down through the royal line ever since. Why didn't anyone try to break it before? They did. For 3 centuries, my family has tried everything. Healers, priests, mages, scholars. Nothing worked. The sorceress built the curse to be unbreakable. But I broke it. You did. He looked at me with wonder and terrible sadness. The sorceress said the curse could only be undone by true sacrifice freely given. We all thought that meant someone had to die for us. But you... He touched the white streak in my hair with infinite gentleness. You didn't just sacrifice your life force. You sacrificed your silence, the very thing that made you special to everyone else. You gave up being the blessed silent to become just Isabel. The truth of his words hit me like lightning. I had not just given my life force to heal his people. I had given up the identity that had defined me my whole life. I was no longer the holy, quiet girl in the glass box. I was no longer a symbol or a tool or a treasure to be traded. I was just a woman who had chosen to help.
And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. "I'm not the blessed silent anymore," I wrote with trembling fingers. "No," Theron said, pressing his forehead against mine. "You're something far better. You're Isabel. You're the woman I love, and you are absolutely, completely, perfectly enough, just as you are." But even as he spoke the words I had waited my whole life to hear, I could feel my strength fading. The white in my hair was spreading. My hands were becoming more transparent with each passing hour. How much time did I have left? Days? Weeks? And was it enough time to teach him that love didn't always mean holding on? Chapter 5. A Song of Our Own. 3 days passed. 3 days of celebration throughout the castle, while I grew weaker with each sunrise. The white had spread through almost all of my hair now. My skin had taken on a translucent quality, as if I were slowly becoming made of moonlight instead of flesh. I tired easily, needing help with simple tasks like dressing and walking. But I was not unhappy. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I chose to be, with someone who loved me for who I was rather than what I could give. Theron rarely left my side. He carried me to the garden so I could feel sunlight on my face. He read to me from his favorite books. He held my hand and told me stories about his childhood, his dreams, his fears. "When I was a boy," he said one afternoon as we sat by the fountain where I had first healed hope, "before the curse manifested, I wanted to be a bard. Can you imagine? A siren king who wanted to use his voice to bring joy instead of destruction." "You still could," I wrote weakly. "The curse is broken, but my voice is still dangerous. One moment of lost control, then don't lose control. Sing for me." He looked at me in shock. "Isabel, if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. I trust you." It took more persuasion, but finally he agreed to try. Just a few notes, just enough to prove to himself that his voice could create beauty instead of destruction. He began to sing, a soft, wordless melody that spoke of ocean waves and distant shores. His voice was rich and deep, nothing like the harsh, cursed sound I had first heard. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. As he sang, I felt something stir inside me. Not magic exactly, but something deeper. A recognition, a completion. My own voice joined his, weak but clear. Together we wove a song that was neither his nor mine, but ours. A melody that spoke of love found in darkness, of hope born from despair, of two broken souls making each other whole. When the song ended, we sat in perfect silence. But it was not the empty silence I had known all my life. It was the rich, full silence that comes after music, when the heart is too full for words. "That was perfect," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "That was us," I wrote. That night, the attack came. I was resting in our shared room. Yes, our room now. Propriety seemed less important when time was running short. When I heard the war horns. Shouts echoed through the castle. The smell of smoke drifted through the windows. Theron burst through the door, already dressed in his armor. His face was set in hard lines, but his eyes were frightened. "The Crimson Pack," he said grimly, "led by Alpha Marcus Bloodfang. They've been watching us, waiting for a sign of weakness. They think the end of the curse means we're vulnerable now." He knelt beside the bed and took my hands in his gauntleted ones. They were cold and trembling slightly. "I have to fight them," he said. "I have to protect our people. But leaving you when you're like this—" "Go," I wrote with effort. "Your people need you." "Isabel, I will be fine. Go." He stared at me for a long moment, conflict written clearly on his face. Then he leaned forward and kissed me, soft and desperate and full of promises we might not have time to keep. "If something happens to me," he said against my lips, "know that these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me more than healing. You gave me hope. You gave me love. Then he was gone, and I was alone with the sound of battle raging outside my windows. The fighting went on for hours. From my bed, I could see the enemy wolves circling the castle like a dark storm. I could hear Theron's voice shouting orders, the clash of weapons, the cries of wounded men. Through it all, Hope stayed curled beside me, whimpering softly. The little wolf could sense my distress, could feel the wrongness in the air. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. A scream. Theron's scream. The bond between us, forged by magic and sacrifice and love, sang with his pain. He was hurt, badly hurt. I tried to get up, but my legs would not support me. I was too weak, too drained by the healing magic I had poured out. I could only lie there, helpless, while the man I loved fought and bled to protect his people.
But as I lay there, fury began to build in my chest. Not the cold anger I have known in my old life, the helpless rage of having no choices. This was different. This was fierce and protective and powerful. How dare they hurt him? How dare they threaten the people we had fought so hard to save? I closed my eyes and reached deep inside myself, deeper than I had ever gone before, past the healing magic, past the gentle songs, to the very core of my being, to the voice I had never fully unleashed. I opened my mouth and sang. Not a hum, not a whisper, not the careful, controlled melody we had shared in the garden. This was my true voice, wild and unrestrained and absolutely furious. The song poured out of me like a tidal wave, carrying all my love for Theron, all my protective instincts for his people, all my rage at those who would harm what was precious to me. The magic was unlike anything I had ever felt. It swept through the castle, through the courtyards, across the battlefield like the voice of an angry goddess. The effect was immediate and absolute. The attacking wolves froze mid-charge, their eyes going wide with terror. Even their alpha, a massive beast with blood-red eyes and scars covering his muzzle, stopped in his tracks. But my song did not harm them. Instead, it showed them the truth. It let them feel, for just a moment, the depth of love and sacrifice that protected this place. It showed them what it meant to fight not for conquest or glory, but for something precious worth defending. One by one, they began to retreat. The lesser wolves turned and fled outright. Even Bloodfang, after a moment of terrible hesitation, tucked his massive tail and loped away into the darkness. My song had not defeated them through violence. It had defeated them through truth. But the effort cost me everything I had left. The song ended, and I collapsed back onto the pillows. The last of my strength flowed out of me, taking with it the last traces of brown in my hair, the last hint of color in my skin. When Theron found me, minutes later, I was as white as winter snow, but I was smiling. "You saved us," he said, kneeling beside the bed with tears streaming down his face. His armor was dented, his sword arm bandaged, but he was alive, again. "You saved us all." I managed to lift one hand to his cheek, though it took all my concentration. "You are mine to protect," I whispered, each word a tremendous effort. "Just as I am yours." He caught my hand and pressed it to his lips. "Always," he said, "always and forever. Marry me," I wrote on the paper beside my pillow, the letters barely legible. He read the words and his face transformed. The grief, the fear, all of it was swept away by something bright and fierce and joyful. "Yes," he said, "yes, 1,000 times yes. Today, right now. I don't care if you're dying. I don't care if we only have hours. I want you to be my wife." So we were married that very night, in my bedroom with Hope as our witness, and the priest speaking words of binding over two people who were already bound by something stronger than law or custom. I wore a simple white nightgown, my snow-white hair braided with flowers that Theron had picked himself. I was not the blessed silent anymore. I was not a holy symbol or a living cure. I was just Isabel, a woman who had found her voice and used it to save the people she loved. When it came time for vows, I spoke them out loud with the last of my strength. I was sold for my silence, I said, looking into his beloved eyes. But I choose you with my voice. I choose to love. I choose you. His own vows were simple and perfect. You taught me that strength is not about power over others. It's about protecting what matters. You matter, Isabel. You have always mattered, and you always will. When he kissed me, I tasted salt from his tears and something sweeter, the promise that I had been truly loved, truly chosen, and truly seen. The next morning, I did not wake up. Chapter 6. The Voice I Always Had. I existed in a place between dreaming and waking, between life and whatever comes after. I could hear voices sometimes. Theron's voice, broken with grief, begging me to come back to him. The servants whispering prayers, Hope's soft whimpers as the little wolf refused to leave my bedside. But I was so tired. The magic had taken everything from me, leaving me empty as a hollow shell. It would be so easy to let go, to drift away into that soft, silent darkness. Then I heard something that changed everything. Singing. It was Theron's voice, but not alone. The entire castle had joined him. Every person I had healed, every servant, every guard. They were singing the wordless melody we had created together in the garden, the song that belonged to both of us. Their voices wove together in harmony, creating something beautiful and powerful and alive. It was not magic, exactly, but it was something just as miraculous. Love made audible, gratitude given voice. Come back to us, their songs seemed to say. Come back to the life you chose. And slowly, impossibly, I began to remember why I wanted to. I remembered Theron's smile the first time I touched him. I remembered the stone pup running free in the garden. I remembered children laughing in halls that had been silent for years. I remembered that I was no longer the blessed silent, trapped in other people's expectations. I was Isabel, a woman who had found her voice and used it to reshape the world. With tremendous effort, I opened my eyes. Theron was beside me, as I knew he would be. He looked terrible, haggard and drawn, as if he hadn't slept in days. But when he saw me looking at him, his face lit up like sunrise. "Isabel," he breathed, "you came back." I tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. Always. The healers said it was impossible. The magic should have consumed me completely. By all rights, I should have died the night I sang the attackers away. But love, they said, was its own kind of magic. Love and the combined will of everyone whose life I had touched. Somehow, their gratitude and affection had anchored my soul to the world of the living. I would never be the same. My hair remained white as snow, and I tired easily. The magic had left permanent marks on me. But I was alive, and I was loved, and that was enough. More than enough. 3 months later, I stood in the same garden where I had first healed Hope, wearing a dress of blue silk that made my white hair shine like starlight. Theron wore a crown of silver, but to me, he looked most beautiful when he smiled. Our wedding, our real wedding, was small and perfect. All the people I had healed were there, along with their families. Marina brought bread she had baked herself. David stood
Guard, though there were no threats to guard against. Lucy scattered flower petals with joyful abandon. When it came time for vows, I spoke them clearly, my voice strong and sure. I was sold for my silence, I said, looking into Theron's beloved eyes. But I choose you with my voice. I choose to speak. I choose to love. I choose you today and always. His own vows brought tears to everyone's eyes. You taught me that the most beautiful songs are sung not with power, but with love. You are my song, Isabel. You are my voice, my heart, my home. When he kissed me, the whole crowd cheered, and Hope howled with what sounded suspiciously like approval. That night, in our shared chambers, Theron traced the white in my hair with gentle, reverent fingers. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The cost of breaking the curse?" I thought about the scared girl who had been sold like cattle. I thought about the woman who had chosen to sacrifice herself for strangers. I thought about the person I had become, someone who was valued not for her silence or her usefulness, but simply for being herself. "No," I said. "I learned something important through all of this." "What?" I turned in his arms so I could see his face. I always had a voice. I was just afraid to use it. The magic didn't give me power. It just helped me find the courage to be who I really was. He smiled and pulled me closer. "And who are you really, my love?" I considered the question seriously. I was no longer the blessed silent. I was no longer a symbol or a cure or a treasure to be traded. I was no longer defined by what I could give others or what they needed from me. "I am Isabel," I said simply. "I am the woman who loves you. I am the person who chose to use her voice to protect what matters, and I am not silent anymore." 5 years later, our daughter was born. She came into the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the castle, announcing her arrival to anyone within miles. She had Theron's dark hair and my stubborn streak, and from the moment she drew breath, she made sure everyone knew exactly how she felt about everything. We named her Harmony, and she was perfect in every possible way.
"She certainly has no trouble making herself heard," Theron said, laughing as our 3-day-old daughter demanded her dinner at the top of her tiny lungs. "Good," I said, settling her against my chest to nurse. "May she never know what it's like to believe her voice doesn't matter." As she grew, Harmony became the light of our lives and the terror of every servant in the castle. She was bright and loud and fearless, asking endless questions and climbing on everything she could reach. But my favorite moments were the quiet ones, when the 3 of us would sit in the garden and sing together. Harmony couldn't carry a tune yet, but she added her own joyful noise to our melodies, creating something uniquely ours. "Tell me the story again," she would demand, settled comfortably between us, "about the singing lady and the stone king." And I would tell her about a girl who thought her silence made her special, until she learned that the most important thing wasn't how quiet you could be, but what you chose to do when you found your voice. "And they live happily ever after?" she would ask, even though she knew the answer. I would look at my husband, my partner, my choice, my song, and at our daughter, bright and loud and perfect. I would think about the garden where stone had become life, where curse had become blessing, where silence had found its voice. "Yes, little bird," I would say, my voice strong and clear and completely my own. They lived happily ever after, because she learned that the best stories don't end with silence. They end with a song. And we would sit together as the sun set, each of us adding our voice to that song, not the careful, controlled magic I had once used to heal curses, but something better, the sound of a family, the sound of choice, the sound of love freely given. It was the sound of a woman who had found her voice and used it to build a life worth singing about. 10 years later, the messenger arrived on a spring morning, his horse lathered with sweat and his face grave with important news. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply to Theron, "the Council of Kingdoms has heard tales of your queen's gift. They request her aid. The Shadowlands are expanding again, and their darkness turns everything it touches to ash.
They believe she might be able to. No, Theron said, his voice cutting through the messenger's words like a blade.
I looked up from where I sat in the garden, watching 8-year-old Harmony chase butterflies with Hope, the original Hope, now ancient but still spry. Our daughter had indeed inherited her mother's gift for healing magic, but she used it to mend her doll's torn dresses and help wounded animals, not to save kingdoms. Your Majesty, the messenger persisted, surely you understand the greater good. I understand, I said, rising and walking over to join them, that you've traveled a very long way to ask me to sacrifice myself for strangers again. The messenger looked startled. Perhaps he had expected the famous silent angel to be more accommodating. The need is great, Your Majesty. Surely your gifts are mine to use as I choose, I said firmly. I am not a tool to be borrowed whenever there's a crisis. I am a person, a wife, a mother. My first duty is to my own family. But think of all the lives you could save. Theron stepped forward, and there was something dangerous in his expression. My wife has already saved all the lives she intends to save through sacrifice. If the other kingdoms want our help, they can ask properly, with respect, with compensation, and with full acceptance that no is an acceptable answer. The messenger sputtered about duty and the greater good, but I had stopped listening. Instead, I was watching my daughter, who had abandoned her butterfly chase and was now singing softly to a bird with a broken wing. As her small, clear voice rose in melody, the bird's wing began to heal. But Harmony showed no signs of the weakness that had once plagued me. Her hair remained glossy brown, her cheeks pink with health. She had learned, from birth, that her magic belonged to her, that healing others was a choice, not an obligation. "Mama," she called, running over with the now healthy bird perched on her finger. "Look, I helped him, but I didn't get tired this time." "That's because you're learning to heal with love instead of sacrifice," I told her, kissing the top of her head. "The magic flows better when you're not trying to pour yourself into it." She beamed at the praise, then noticed the messenger. "Who's that?" "Someone who wanted to take your mama away," Theron said, his voice still holding an edge of warning. "That's not nice. Mama belongs with us." "Yes, she does," Theron agreed, wrapping his arms around both of us. "And here she stays." The messenger left empty-handed, and I felt no guilt about it whatsoever. I had learned, after years of being treated as a resource instead of a person, that saying no was not selfish. It was necessary. That evening, as we sat in our favorite spot in the garden, Harmony asked the question I had been expecting. "Mama, why didn't you help those people? You always help people." "I do help people," I said, settling her more comfortably in my lap. "I help our people, here in our kingdom. I help you when you have nightmares. I help your father when the old memories make him sad. I help the servants and the guards and the merchants who come to trade with us. But those other people need help too," I agreed. "But that doesn't mean I'm the one who has to help them. There are many people in the world with many different gifts. Just because I can do something doesn't mean I must do it." She considered this seriously. "So I don't have to heal everyone who asks?" "You never have to heal anyone you don't want to help," I said firmly. "Your magic is yours. Your choices are yours. Your life is yours." Theron reached over and squeezed my hand. "The most important lesson we can teach her," he said. As the years passed, more requests came. Some were delivered with respect and genuine offers of partnership. Others were demands disguised as pleas. A few came with threats. We accepted some of the respectful requests, working together as a family to help solve problems that genuinely required our unique skills. But we turned down far more than we accepted, and I never once regretted it. Because I had learned something that the girl sold for her silence had never known.
I was not responsible for saving the world. I was only responsible for building the life I wanted to live and protecting the people I chose to love. On Harmony's 18th birthday, she came to us with a decision. "I want to travel," she said. "I want to see the world beyond our kingdom, learn about different kinds of magic, maybe help people who need it." My heart clenched with fear and pride in equal measure. "Are you sure?" "I am," she said, and I heard the certainty in her voice, the same certainty I had felt when I chose to heal Theron's people, when I chose to marry him, when I chose to live rather than drift away into silence.
"Then go," I said, hugging her tight. "But remember, you are not responsible for fixing everything that's broken. You are responsible for being true to yourself." She smiled, and in that smile I saw the woman she had become, strong and kind and completely, utterly free. "I learned from the best," she said. The night before she left, we sat together in the garden one last time as a family of 3. Harmony was no longer the little girl demanding stories. She was a young woman ready to write her own. "Tell me the story one more time," she said, though now it was tradition rather than demand. So I told her about a girl who thought her silence made her special, until she learned that her true strength lay not in the absence of her voice, but in how she chose to use it. "And they lived happily ever after?" she asked, just like she had when she was small. I looked at my husband, still handsome despite the silver threading through his dark hair, still the man who had seen me as more than a symbol. I looked at our daughter, brave and bright and ready to make her own choices in the world. "Yes," I said, my voice as strong and clear as it had been on our wedding day. "We lived happily ever after, because we learned that happiness isn't something that just happens to you, it's something you choose every single day." The next morning, we watched Harmony ride away into her own adventure, her head high and her voice ready to sing whatever songs the world required of her. Theron took my hand as her figure disappeared over the hill. "Do you think she'll be all right?" he asked. "She'll be perfect," I said, with absolute certainty. "She knows who she is and she knows her worth. The world will bend around her voice, not the other way around." And it did. Years later, we received letters from all corners of the kingdoms, telling us of a young healer who only helped when and where she chose, who never sacrificed herself for others' demands, who used her voice to build rather than to diminish herself. She had learned the lesson I spent half my life discovering, that true power lies not in silence or sacrifice, but in choosing when to speak and when to act from a place of love rather than obligation. As for Theron and me, we grew old together in our garden, surrounded by the life and laughter we had chosen to build. His voice never lost its power, but he used it now to sing lullabies to our grandchildren, to tell stories on quiet evenings, to whisper words of love in the darkness before dawn. And I never stopped talking. After years of enforced silence, I discovered I had a great deal to say. I spoke at council meetings and diplomatic gatherings. I wrote letters to scholars and songs for celebrations. I filled the castle with my voice, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. On my 70th birthday, as we sat in our favorite spot watching the sunset, Theron asked me if I had any regrets. I considered the question seriously. I thought of the frightened girl who had been sold like cattle. I thought of the young woman who had nearly died saving strangers. I thought of all the paths I might have taken, all the different lives I could have lived. "No," I said finally, "no regrets. Every choice led me here, to this moment, to this life with you. Even the pain was worth it." "Even being sold?" he asked gently. "Even that," I said, "because it brought me to you, and because it taught me what I was worth,
not as a symbol or a tool, but as a person, as Isabel. He lifted my weathered hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "My Isabel," he said, "my voice, my song, my choice." "And you are mine," I replied. "Always." We died within days of each other, 20 years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had never known a world where voices were silenced or worth was measured by sacrifice. They said that in our final moments, we were heard singing together the same wordless melody we had created in the garden all those years ago, the song that belonged to both of us, and to neither, and to the love we had chosen every day for 50 years. They carved our story in stone above our tomb, not as a legend or fairy tale, but as a reminder. Here lies Isabel, who found her voice, and Theron, who learned to use his. They chose love over duty, truth over silence, and each other over everything else. They lived and loved and sang and were happy. This story was told by the ancestral spirit of Isabel. The end.
If this story captured your heart, then subscribe to the channel and tap the bell. That's how you'll never miss your next epic romance. Want to share this journey with a friend who loves fated mates and alpha heroes as much as you do? Share this video and get lost in the story together. We live for your reactions. Tell us in the comments, who was your favorite character? Until the next chronicle, I'm Georgina. Thank you for listening.